Chapter 8. Lou's Plan. Another family reunion had come to the Delis clan, one in which Paris would be forced to socialize with her husband-to-be. Although the subject matter was inappropriate, she had brought up her true feelings about Valiant and the affection she and Solomon had shared. Unlike Valiant, who had tried to force himself upon Paris on many different occasions, she and Paris's handmaiden, shooed him away. Solomon had never once been unkind, rude, or improper. In fact, Solomon was genteel, and showed upbringing that would cause blue bloods, to question their chivalry. I will not allow this. This Solomon Malachi, or whomever he is of no importance. His background is dirt poor. How do you expect him to provide and shelter you with his income or lack thereof? Lance bellowed. I don't care, father. I love him, and that is all there is to it, Paris yelled in return, defiantly, rising from the table and stomping into her room. Lance's wife, Cicely, stopped him before he could go rushing after her. Lance felt his daughter was acting rash and didn't understand the consequences of her actions. All the while his brother, Louis, sister-in-law Anna, and nephew were sitting at the table, food half-eaten. Valiant had cleared his plate and called on Curio to the garden for some sparring practice. Just then Louis concocted an ingenious idea. What if we had a contest for Paris's hand? One that would prove who is truly worthy of her physically, mentally, and so on, Louis concluded. Lance grinned intently and scooped his brother up in a hug. You're a genius, Lou! I couldn't have thought of a better way to decide Paris's fate, Lance exclaimed, practically dancing. He switched between a reel and a jig in his steps, and Louis nearly chuckled at his brother's awkward, stumbling dancing. That's what he got for downing too many mugs of mead. Nonetheless, it had been decided between the two brothers. On the morrow, Solomon Malachi would be brought to the castle to engage in different skills against the prince. Whomever racked up more points would be deemed worthy of her. The only downside was that if Solomon won, she and Solomon would be exiled, living on their own outside the castle walls, while Valiant was left to find another girl from another kingdom. That was, if there was a girl anywhere in Lyceo who would tolerate his narcissism and patronizing ways. Chapter 9. Valiant versus Solomon. Curio, the ginger page, had been sent to Solomon to require his presence in the king's garden. Does this concern Paris? Solomon inquired, cutting straight to the topic of his concern. Yes, and your presence is commanded at once, Curio replied, leading him by foot to the castle. It was a longer distance to the Delis castle on foot than it was by horse, but Curio had received specific instruction to tire Solomon to give Valiant the advantage in the contest. Surely that was cheating, but unluckily for him, Solomon had terrific stamina and his energy was unmatched. The kings, queens, and a somewhat worried princess watched Solomon face off against Valiant. Both were draped in armor, and even in a heavy suit of steel, Solomon moved very fluidly. There seemed to be an unknown magic about him Paris couldn't explain. Like herself, Solomon read voraciously, and he often quoted fabled alchemists of the land. Little did she know that Solomon was working for a semi-retired one. Each skill tests the mettle of the warriors, and it seemed that both were evenly matched. Valiant barely even broke a sweat when he hit 7 bullseyes in archery. Solomon did so blindfolded. This earned him double points, infuriating Valiant. Valiant wanted to destroy Solomon. In his mind, a twisted vision of himself lopped his head off his shoulders and then vivisected him with great precision. Killing would come for another day, or so the brat knight prayed. It was apparent that Solomon had won the contest, and he did so without even looking tired when it had come to an end. Valiant had seen enough. Enraged, he charged, full throttle, in the general direction of Solomon. Unfortunately, he ran into the end of Wraith, which Solomon had drawn in self-defense. It only struck Valiant in the stomach, but the prince survived. Assassination! Have him thrown in the Tower of Terror for attempted murder, Valiant said with the last ounce of his strength before Curio and Bernard carried him away on a cloth gurney into the infirmary. He would be well taken care of, and he would see another day, but the healing process would take time. He probably wouldn't be coming against Solomon any time soon. In fact, from that day forward, he vowed to himself he would fight no more with this Malachi fellow. In fact, other conquests were on his licentious mind, mainly women of the surrounding kingdom, especially of Daphnia. There were princesses by the dozens, and plenty of time for him to start mending and competing for their affections. Chapter 9. Exiled. Once Paris had run to Solomon, Lance disowned her. "If you want Sir Malachi so badly, then go. Leave here, and never return. If I so much as see your despicable face again, I will have you thrown into the tower," Lance shouted, tears burning his eyes as he thrust her out of the castle forever. Lycia would be a reality, but not with Paris. She had made her proverbial bed, and now she had to lie in it. Paris, though she adored her family, had been happy to be apart from them. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. The freedom she was experiencing was exhilarating. She and Solomon had known each other for approximately a year, and now he had been promising to wed her properly. "You do know that I am fixing to marry you," he began boldly, hoisting her up on midnight and mounting him in one fell swoop. She blushed, lowering her head bashfully. She had known, but she wasn't sure how such a ceremony would be possible. "My father will find someone to marry us. I will inherit the business, and you can even look for work if you want. I can see you being a seller of musical instruments, or perhaps an instructor," Solomon began. Both suggestions were achievable. She wished to be a healer and a dragon tamer. There hadn't been many dragon tamers in Ontario, but the people of this fertile land dwelt with rare and unusual creatures. A few dragons in the mix wouldn't harm anything. Whatever dreams she possessed, Solomon was positive he would see them through and grant them, if the power abided within him, or within his purse, for that matter. Chapter 10. How the Other Half Lives. Valiant, once mended, started a newsletter akin to a want ad, but for prospects of future princesses. They had to meet the criterion of royalty, which would cut his results in half. There were many women applying for the role of wife-to-be, and picky about who really met his criteria, but there would be plenty of time and plenty of gorgeous babes at Daphnia to select from. Solomon kept his word, being a man of honor. He and Paris had been married within the next day of returning to Ontario. It was an intimate gathering of friends, colleagues, and a few outsiders who knew the princess. Being a peasant wasn't too terrible, she felt, and within about a fortnight she had her own healing center as well as a small, modest fleet for raising dragons. Ontario was really quite lovely this time of year, as well as pleasant. She was beginning to truly love her lifestyle here. She knew the schooling in Ontario was fairly good, and given the prowess she and Solomon both had, she predicted their children would have no trouble advancing through school. In their small way, Solomon and Paris were helping others. It may not have been what Paris had desired initially, but someday she felt one of their children would advance to the rank of royalty and truly, after Lycia, alter Lycia for the good of everyone. And so that day she watched her belly grow with anticipation in the arrival of what Darius the Wise said were fraternal twins. Valiant had found a filly he found worthy of his standards in Daphnia. There was a saucy, willful, and somewhat stubborn princess, Arria, who made his heart beat quicken and challenged him in stereotypical views. At first he was a little uncomfortable with her nonconformist attitude, but soon Arria Sylphwise had become his partner, and like it or not, he had become inexplicably changed by her for the better. Chapter 11. Birth of the Twins. The day had come for Paris to deliver her children, and Solomon was practically beside himself. He knew the hospitals and the village were overcrowded, so he called upon the help of his master Darius to assist him in his time of need. "I'm a semi-retired mage. What do you think I am, a midwife?" Darius complained, feeling as if he were being forced into a role he was reluctant to fill. "Darius, I really need you. The hospital is too far away from the barn, The hospital is too far away, and the barn would be a comfortable place for her. We can make it as sanitary as need be, and I'm sure a little spell or elixir here or there won't harm her or the babies," Solomon mentioned. Darius knew what he was asking for, and put his alchemy to good use. The barn was not far away from where Midnight had been kept, and a stable was being used for a birthing chamber. Paris didn't mind the accommodations, especially since the day was so splendid and the sun so warm. It took hours as the labor pangs took hold of her, but the elixir that Darius fed her helped ease any pain that she might have experienced. The initial birthing of the twins wasn't painful at all. In fact, the two nearly leapt from their mother's womb to greet the world with their loud, boisterous cries. The boy, taking after his dad, was born first, and he bore the name of Hubert Lance. Hubert was the name of an uncle Paris had been fond of, and Lance, of course, a fitting middle name, even though King Lance had not spoken to his daughter for years now. There were mysterious gifts that would come by the post that bore the Delis seal. She was certain these were provisions given to her by her parents, showing, even though she had been exiled, they still loved her and could never completely disown her. The second baby, Adara Marie, came into the world following after her brother. She had taken a hold of his heel and been pulled out with him. They had almost been born in concert, but she was a little later with her debut. She looked exactly like her mom, except her hair on her darling head was curly and ringlets that framed her chubby face. Adara had been so named after Darius's late wife, who had died due to consumption, but he felt, knowing that Solomon had remembered her and honored her existence in this spellbinding little girl. Chapter 12. Watching Solomon from a Distance. Adara and Hubert grew strong, wise, and determined. Adara had her mother's animal magnetism and was accustomed to riding dragons in and out of Oratorio. Hubert was akin to his father in prowess with weapons, particularly that of his own sword, Angel's Tear, that he forged himself. The two were ambitious in helping transform Lycia, even though to the royals they were nothing but peons. However, the king's daughter Lyra had taken immense interest in Hubert. She had watched him take up monster slaying in his father's stead. There were days when Solomon and Hubert slew monsters, but mainly Hubert took upon the brunt of keeping Lycia free of the dark menaces. One day, Lyra had sent a carrier pigeon to Hubert to meet him in the same area where Solomon and Paris had experienced their picnic in Valerian. She wanted to see him personally and test his skill in fencing. She had seen him wield Angel's Tear from afar, but she wondered how this translated into old-fashioned foil against foil fighting. She would soon find out. Evenly matched. It was evening when the carrier pigeon had arrived. The Malachi family sat to sup at the dinner table, and Hubert took message from the pigeon's leg. Adara chuckled and said knowingly, "It's from Lyra. I think she may have a fancy for you." "Shush! I highly doubt someone of your noble blood would take a second glance at me," Hubert retorted deprecatingly. But it was as Adara had said. Her powers of intuition had never failed her. "I want to come and observe. I'm a bit anxious. I know nothing of what this princess is like. Isn't she related?" Hubert said, trying not to gag on his gruel at the thought of being cousin to the princess. Even in that day and age, incest was nothing new, and being between cousins, it wasn't considered immoral. The thought of it made him shudder. How could his own cousins have feelings for him? He shook off the disgust and disdain he felt in the pit of his gut so much that he still felt nauseous. Nevertheless, the next day, Lyra Delis and Hubert Malachi faced each other with foils. Both could parry and thrust with great speed, and neither one of them seemed to land any points against each other. The way in which they evaded each other's movements was something akin to poetry in motion. Since neither of them was going to make any advancement, she called a tie. "I can see your swordmanship runs deep, Sir Malachi. I was wondering if you would want to court me. I know it's rather bold of me to ask, but I do fancy you quite a bit," she said. "Told you," Adara mouthed teasingly. Hubert wanted to Indian rub those words right off of his smirking sister's lips, but he couldn't help but chortle at his sister's jesting. Even if she was his cousin, she was breathtakingly ravishing. Everything about her was gorgeous. Like her father, she had long blonde tresses of hair and soft limpid eyes. His nausea had been replaced by affection. Slowly but surely the seeds of love had been sown once again. Epilogue. Even though Solomon and Paris were the ones who felt destined to transform Lycia, their son, Hubert, had been the destined one. He had married Lyra after about a year and a half of courting her. King Valiant, who had been a spoiled little rich boy at the start, had been changed by the birth of his daughter Lyra, and was even more altered once he had seen grandchildren. They were named Paris and Lance. Lance had decided to allow his daughter back into the arms of the kingdom once again. It took a near-blow death due to pneumonia to shake him up, but he relented his feelings, made amends, and brought her back in. He also welcomed Solomon. He had never hated Solomon, per se. In fact, he had great admiration for the young lad due to the fact he was strong, stalwart, faithful, and true. He was the right hand of the king when it came to fighting monsters and forcing back their ranks. Even the fool, the ogre who had such a grudge against Valiant, had been bested, and it was rare if any such creatures came stomping about the lands. Only foolhardy trolls ever dared to try their luck against Solomon or his boy. Both were knighted, and Andara was given royal blessings, as well due to her ability to heal and mend. She was also thanked for giving more peace to the land with magical creatures. Unicorns had been seen more frequently due to her lyre playing and singing. They loved her, and often she had many around her as companions, but never pets. Like other rarities, they were free beings that would come and go as they pleased. Lycia was being changed day by day. Peasants were becoming more equal to kings and vice versa. The land knew that what harmony truly meant, and the people could not be happier. They prayed this would last for years to come down the line, and with such forthright, somewhat unconventional minds, such as the queen to be Lyra and her loyal king to be Solomon. That should be. Excuse me, I did that incorrectly. That should be. Shoot, I have to go back and look. See what his name was. Excuse me. Hubert. And Hubert. Excuse me. I'll change that. Lycia was incapable in carrying hands. The end.